I want you to just, for a second, picture the Arctic. You probably see this vast, silent, white landscape. It seems so clean, almost eternal.
Right, pristine.
Exactly. But deep down, under all that silence, meters into the frozen ground, there's a clock.
Mm.
And it's ticking down. And the really scary part is we're the ones who've been winding it.
And that's really what this deep dive is all about. What happens when that clock runs out? When the planet's biggest time capsule starts to open up.
Yeah.
Our sources, they document this really terrifying intersection of climate science and microbiology. And they're not mincing words. Some are calling it Odigilo do apocalypse.
The thaw of the apocalypse?
A thaw of the apocalypse. And this isn't some, theoretical boogeyman. We're talking about ancient, perfectly preserved pathogens. Some are hundreds of thousands of years old, all trapped in the permafrost, and now, well, they're waking up.
That's right. The so-called zombie viruses. And the material we've looked at, it really shifts this whole threat. It's not a hypothetical anymore. It's becoming a mathematical probability, a global security failure waiting to happen.
The resilience of these things is just, it's astonishing. So our mission today is to cut through the noise, the sensationalism. We're going to get into the hard evidence. We're going to unpack this biological time capsule. We'll spend a good amount of time on the lab proof, the actual experiments that show these ancient organisms are still viable.
And then the chilling part.
Yeah. We'll walk you through the scenarios the scientific models are predicting. We'll investigate how this threat could develop step by step, almost like we're watching it unfold in real time.
Yeah, we're going beyond just the what and really digging into the why this is happening now. And of course, the big what-if scenarios that come out of the data. So let's start at the beginning with the vault itself. The thing that's kept these horrors buried for millennia, the permafrost. To really get the scale of this threat, we have to understand what permafrost actually is. I think most people just think of it as, frozen dirt.
Right, ground that's been frozen for a couple of years.
Exactly. But in places like the Arctic or the Siberian plains, we're talking about ground that has been continuously frozen for hundreds of thousands of years.
Even millions in some cases.
And it goes deep, hundreds of meters deep.
And that depth, that duration, that's what's so critical here. Permafrost isn't just inert, frozen ground. It's the planet's largest biological time capsule.
A time capsule. I like that.
It is. Its stability, the fact that there's been almost zero decomposition over geological time, that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
And so dangerous.
Because anywhere else on Earth, when something organic dies, it breaks down. You have bacteria, fungi, scavengers, they break it all down. The carbon gets released.
Right. But in the permafrost, it's all locked in stasis, full of preservation. Those layers, they're packed with the remains of, everything. Plants, animals, entire ancient ecosystems.
Mammoth remains,
extinct flowers, and, this is the key part, the microorganisms that lived in them and on them. It is perfect cryogenic preservation, deep frozen history, completely undisturbed.
And the sheer scale of this vault, that's what separates this threat from, say, just finding some random microbes in the soil.
Oh, absolutely. Forget the pathogens for a second. The permafrost is the largest land-based carbon sink on the planet. It's holding something like 1.7 trillion tons of trapped carbon.
Wow.
That's more than double the amount of carbon that's in our entire atmosphere right now.
So all of that organic matter, it's not just sitting there, it's fuel.
It's the perfect medium. It's a nutrient-rich buffet just waiting to reserve all this dormant microbial life. The deep cold, it doesn't just stop life, it stops decay. It stops degradation. It makes it the perfect long-term storage unit for viruses and bacteria.
So the moment that ground thaws, it's not just releasing carbon dioxide. It's like you're creating this massive, uncontrolled petri dish.
Exactly. A biological culture where these ancient things can wake up and find a meal ready and waiting after, a 100,000-year nap.
Okay, so we have the vault. It's huge, it's deep, it's cold. But the real question is, can something that's been frozen for, say, 50,000 years, or even 750,000 years, can it actually wake up?
And still be infectious.
The scientific term is microbial resurrection. It sounds very academic, very cautious.
It does.
But the term the media uses, zombie virus, well, based on the results, it feels a lot more accurate.
And this is where we really have to lean on the lab evidence because it's overwhelming at this point. This isn't a guess. Scientists have done the work. They've proven that viability is retained over these immense timescales.
They didn't just find bits of ancient DNA.
No. They found functional, living, infectious agents.
Let's start with the big one. The breakthrough that really, I think, stunned everyone back in 2014.
Right. The French scientists.
They deliberately revived a giant virus, Pithovirus sibericum.
Yes, and they got the sample from 30,000-year-old Siberian permafrost.
Yeah.
But the key here is the method. It's one thing to find viral particles. The real test of resurrection is function.
So what did they do?
They took this ancient virus and introduced it to modern single-celled amoeba in the lab. The result was, well, is a dramatic success. The pithovirus reanimated, it successfully broke into the modern amoeba cell, hijacked its machinery,
Wow.
replicated itself, and then destroyed the host cell, just like any modern virus would.
That experiment proved it was possible. But 30,000 years, I mean, geologically speaking, that's not that long ago. The next question had to be, what's the upper limit? How long can infectivity last?
And that boundary got pushed much further in 2023.
Yeah.
Researchers in France and Russia went back to the permafrost, and this time they revived an even older amoeba virus, one that had been frozen for an incredible 48,500 years. The technical implications of that are just profound.
How do you even confirm that? I mean, nearly 50,000 years of suspended animation. How do you know it's functioning perfectly?
Well, they didn't just watch it replicate, they studied its compatibility. This virus, it's been locked away since the late Pleistocene, but it still had all the right molecular tools to recognize, to invade, and to exploit a modern cell.
So the locks and keys still fit?
The locks and keys still fit. Our sources say it functioned as if it had fallen asleep yesterday. The fact that almost 50,000 years of evolutionary distance between it and its host meant nothing to its machinery, that's a terrifying testament to how perfect the permafrost is at preservation.
And it's not just viruses. We have to talk about the bacteria from the Tibetan Plateau glaciers, because that just pushes the timescale to a place that's almost impossible to imagine.
This is where we break the 500,000-year barrier, and then some. They extracted material from these high-altitude glaciers, which act a lot like permafrost for preservation, and it dated back over 750,000 years.
750,000 years.
Right. And when they reanimated these ancient bacteria in the lab, they didn't just show, a flicker of life. They immediately became functional, viable cells. They could reproduce. And crucially, they could engage in biological processes, which includes the potential for infection. This takes the threat beyond just viral pandemics into the realm of ancient bacterial plagues.
That duration, that viability, it completely redefines how we have to think about infectious disease risk. Time is not a sterilizer, not when something is deep frozen.
Yeah.
So, okay, we have undeniable proof. Microbial resurrection is possible. It's a fact. The horrifying part is that these careful lab experiments are now being mirrored in the real world on a massive scale driven by climate change.
Precisely. The degelo, the thaw.
Yeah.
It's not some distant threat anymore. It's happening right now. And it's accelerating at a rate that is blowing past the climate models from even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I saw the Arctic is warming 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet.
It is.
Which means we're past the point of, slow, gradual melting.
Huh?
We are now seeing huge, sudden collapses of permafrost, big chunks of land just slumping and exposing these deep, ancient layers.
And that rapid thaw, it's releasing millions of different kinds of microorganisms all at once, back into the modern environment, into surface water, into river systems, into clouds of dust.
It's a planetary-scale, uncontrolled biological experiment.
Yes, the sources really stress that the scale of this release cannot be overstated. An entire archives of ancient biology is being opened up simultaneously.
And that shift from a lab possibility to a massive natural release. That's why this is no longer a future problem. It's a catastrophe in slow motion. It's one we started. And if the science wasn't enough, we already have a real-world lethal demonstration of this exact process. I want you, our listener, to just visualize this. Western Siberia, the Yamal Peninsula, it's August 2016. And it's a brutal summer, a record-breaking heat wave in the region.
That heat wave was the trigger, the definitive trigger. It caused this extensive melting of the permafrost, and that thaw exposed the burial site of a reindeer carcass.
A very specific reindeer carcass.
A very specific one. This animal had died of anthrax from the bacterium Bacillus anthracis during an outbreak way back in 1941. So that carcass and the anthrax spores inside it had been locked in the ice for 75 years. Dormant.
The heat thaws the ground, and the anthrax spores, which are famously resilient, they reactivate. After 3/4 of a century in a deep freeze, the pathogen comes back to life, and it immediately starts killing again.
And the consequences for the region were disastrous. The reactivated spores got into the local soil and water. Thousands of reindeer died very quickly in the outbreak.
It wasn't just animals, though.
No. Dozens of local people, the Nanets herders, were hospitalized. And the most heartbreaking proof of concept, a 12-year-old boy lost his life.
Killed by a pathogen from before World War II, revived purely by climate change. And this wasn't some unknown exotic virus. This was anthrax, a known killer, something we thought we understood. And it just reappeared from the past, completely sidestepping all our modern biosecurity just by melting out of the ground.
That event should have set off a global alarm, a screaming one. Our sources see this anthrax outbreak as the first definitive proof that pathogens from these ancient reservoirs can and will cause large-scale outbreaks.
It was the prelude.
It was the prelude to the much larger global problem. And yet, politically, it was contained. It was treated as a regional anomaly in a remote part of Russia.
We just ignored it.
We largely ignore the severity of that first shot across the bow.
Which really begs the question, why? Why was it so easy to dismiss? Was it just a failure of imagination?
I think it was a failure of synthesis. We're used to tracking diseases that follow a known path. This event involved climate science, veterinary science, ancient microbiology. These fields don't usually share security briefings. They contain the immediate outbreak, but they failed to connect the dots to the accelerating thaw happening across the entire northern hemisphere.
So beyond a known killer like anthrax, what else is in this giant biological freezer? If we're really surveying this frozen arsenal, what are we looking at?
Well, the scope of it is what's so scary. It ranges from things we know but have eradicated to things that are completely unknown. For example, we know that permafrost contains old burial ground, and that means it likely contains centuries-old strains of smallpox.
Smallpox. We globally eradicated that in 1980. That was one of the biggest public health victories in history. Reintroducing a viable strain would be an absolute catastrophe. Modern populations have basically zero immunity. We stopped vaccinating decades ago.
Precisely. And then you have ancient strains of influenza, other respiratory viruses that tore through ancient populations. These things evolved under totally different pressures. Our modern flu shots, they're based on strains from the last few years. They would be completely useless against a flu that last circulated 10,000 years ago.
But the biggest risk, the most unpredictable one, has to be the pathogens that are totally unknown to science.
Absolutely. The viruses and bacteria that infected ancient megafauna, mammoths, woolly rhinos.
Things our ancestors hunted.
Things that have no modern equivalent. These pathogens belong to viral and bacterial families that might not even exist in the modern world anymore. This means there are things for which humanity has zero, and I mean zero, natural or acquired immunity.
Our immune systems are built on a library of the last 10,000 years of microbes. These things are from a totally different library. Okay, and this is where the threat gets really interesting. It moves beyond just how deadly something is and into the complete failure of our modern medicine. Because even if an ancient bacterium isn't immediately super lethal, the resistance genes they carry could be.
This might be the most insidious part of the whole permafrost threat. Research has now definitively shown that these ancient bacteria carry highly advanced multiple genes for antibiotic resistance.
But they evolved before we ever invented antibiotics.
Exactly. Their resistance isn't a reaction to our medicine. It evolved as a survival tool in a brutally competitive ancient environment.
So their defense is proactive, not reactive. They built these defenses thousands of years before we discovered penicillin. They are naturally immune to our entire medical arsenal just because they're from a different time.
And we have to look at the mechanism. The researchers studying this found these ancient bacteria carry these incredibly sophisticated genetic structures called integrons.
Integrons.
They're not just simple mutations. They are complex genetic elements. You can think of them as mobile biological hard drives. They're capable of storing and moving large clusters of resistance genes.
So what does that mobility mean when one of these ancient bacteria meets a modern one?
It means catastrophic horizontal gene transfer.
It can share its genes.
It can share its software. Integrons specialize in capturing and transferring resistance genes across different species of bacteria. So an ancient, maybe even harmless permafrost bacterium carrying a massive resistance payload immunity to 6 different classes of our best antibiotics. Yeah. It gets released, it meets a common modern bug like E. coli, and it can immediately and very efficiently upload its entire 750,000-year history of super resistance to that modern aggressive strain.
That's a mind-blowing implication. It's like a biological software update, instantly upgrading a common infection to a level of resistance our drugs have never seen.
Right.
Simple infections become a death sentence again, like in the pre-antibiotic era.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our most powerful broad-spectrum antibiotics, they become wet paper. This isn't just another pandemic threat. This is a complete systemic collapse of modern infectious disease medicine. The evolutionary jump we thought might take centuries could happen in a matter of days.
The anthrax outbreak was the real-world warning. The 48,500-year-old virus was the lab proof. Now we have to look at how scientists are trying to quantify this risk. In 2023, they started using these sophisticated computer simulations to model the ecological probability of disaster.
And these models are so important because they move the discussion away from anecdotes about one specific virus and toward a general quantifiable risk. They wanted to know, what happens if just one dormant ancient pathogen gets loose in a modern ecosystem?
They're not predicting which one, but what happens when one does.
Exactly. What happens when a viable invader emerges?
And they started small, with a really conservative threshold. What if only 1% of the microbes released were actually infectious?
Even at that 1% level, the simulation showed generalized environmental damage, a significant decline in modern host organisms around the world. So even a tiny invasion causes a measurable hit to biodiversity and stability.
But things got bad, fast, when they nudged that probability up just a little bit. To just 3% infectivity? The sources say that small shift represents a kind of ecological tipping point.
Yeah, this is where you see ecological resilience just fail.
Yeah.
In 3% of the simulated cases, which is still a small number, but it's statistically plausible, the ancient invasive pathogen became the dominant species globally.
It took over.
It took over. It outcompeted or killed off established microbial and animal communities. It shows just how fragile our modern ecosystems are when they face a pre-evolved, optimized invader.
And the most aggressive simulation, the one they called plausible but worst case.
Yes. That scenario resulted in a 30% reduction in the overall size of the modern host community compared to the control groups.
30%. That's not just a dip in population. That's a massive die-off across multiple species.
It's a fundamental threat to the ecological stability of the entire planet, not just a threat to us.
I have to ask, though, ecosystems get hit with new microbes all the time. Why are these prehistoric ones so uniquely dangerous?
That's a great question. And the sources explain it through the lens of evolutionary distance. Modern pathogens and hosts, they've co-evolved. There's an arms race, a certain equilibrium.
Our defenses know what to look for, more or less.
Exactly. But these prehistoric pathogens are evolutionarily alien. They enter a host population that has never seen their specific structures, their toxins, their methods of attack. The 30% die-off happens because the defense systems, both immunological and ecological, are fighting completely blind against an enemy that was optimized for a different, forgotten world.
And we have to stress, this is a critical point. These catastrophic simulations, they focused on the release of just one specific ancient pathogen.
That is the multiplier effect. And it's what makes the reality so much more dangerous. The permafrost isn't releasing one single threat. It's releasing millions of diverse species all at once, viruses, bacteria, fungi.
So we're not just facing one pandemic. We could be facing 10 or 20 or 50 at the same time.
Exactly. And our systems, our governments, our medical infrastructure, they buckled under the strain of one novel pandemic with COVID-19.
Right.
The idea of trying to handle multiple simultaneous biological threats, each needing its own diagnostic, its own treatment, it's impossible. The system would collapse from the complexity alone. Which brings us to how Professor Corey Bradshaw analyzes this risk. He calls it the risk of microbial black swans.
And for our listener, a black swan event is something that's rare, it's unpredictable, but it has absolutely catastrophic consequences. It changes everything.
Right, like COVID-19 in a way.
But the data suggests the permafrost could hold black swans that are orders of magnitude worse than anything we've ever seen.
That's the point. We aren't just rolling the dice once. The thaw is vastly increasing the number of dice being rolled over and over again.
And the unpredictability is the real killer here. You can't prepare for 1,000 different unknown threats.
You can't. You can't pre-vaccinate. You can't pre-develop antivirals.
Yeah.
The simulations confirm there is a realistic probability of a pathogen emerging that causes severe ecological impacts. That 30% host loss, we don't know which one it will be or when it will emerge, but the reservoir is massive and we are rapidly tearing down the walls that contain it.
So now let's take all of this, the science, the models, and weave it into a single narrative, a timeline. And we want you to enter this scenario with us. This is where it becomes personal.
Imagine, if you will, a remote industrial site,
Right.
high in the Arctic, maybe a mining operation in northern Siberia. Huge machines are drilling into the newly thawed, unstable permafrost. They break through an ancient layer of ice, and it releases this invisible mist of aerosolized microorganisms into the air.
And you're one of the workers there. You're unaware of this microscopic payload. You inhale the mist, nothing happens. Not right away. These aren't poisons, they're biological agents. They need time to incubate. 3 days later, you feel it. An unexplained, persistent fever. Then a colleague gets it. Within a week, 40 of you are hospitalized in the nearest city, Yakutsk.
And the doctors are baffled. The symptoms are like nothing they've ever seen. Rapid organ failure, strange internal bleeding, a weird neurotoxicity. All their initial tests are useless. The pathogen doesn't show up.
Until they do the genetic sequencing.
Right. And the horrifying truth comes back. It doesn't match anything in any modern database. Because it's 50,000 years old, the early mortality rate is estimated at 60%.
The first week ends there, a localized lethal mystery. The doctors can't name the disease that's killing you. They can't treat it. They can't understand it. The time bomb is set, but the rest of the world has no idea the clock is ticking for them, too.
Now, the scientific models say the most critical step for global spread is the zoonotic jump. The virus has to pass through local animal species first.
This gives it time to adapt, to mutate, to optimize itself for mammals, for birds. We saw this with SARS-CoV-2, with Ebola, with HIV.
Exactly. Nature uses animal reservoirs as a training ground before it jumps to humans. And the vectors in the Arctic are incredibly mobile. Infected reindeer, voles, they start carrying the mutated pathogen across huge distances.
Well, the real global distributors, they're the birds.
Arctic waterfowl. They contract an avian-optimized version of the virus, and then they fly. They fly along these ancient global migratory routes that connect Siberia to Europe, Alaska to Argentina. They cover 6 continents.
So within just a few weeks, the prehistoric pathogen that started as a mist you inhaled at a drill site, it's now in animal populations on every continent. It's multiplying, it's adapting, and it's happening before the World Health Organization has even officially logged the first human death.
And the first human case is outside that initial site. They'll be misdiagnosed. Severe flu, maybe, something else. That delay is critical. It allows for exponential growth to take hold.
By the end of the 3rd month, it's no longer a mystery. It is an undeniable global crisis. Hospitals everywhere are filling up. But for the first time in modern history, our best medical tools are failing, completely and systematically.
The failure comes from that evolutionary distance. If it's a virus, our antivirals are useless. They're designed to block specific mechanisms in modern viruses. This ancient thing has a completely foreign biology. The drug targets just aren't there.
What about vaccines, our ultimate weapon?
Vaccine development is a process. It takes months, even in an emergency. But in this scenario, you don't have months. You have weeks before communities are overwhelmed. The production and distribution will lag fatally behind the spread.
And if the threat is bacterial, then the failure is even more absolute because of the super resistance.
If it's bacterial, all those integrons become brutally real. Every major class of antibiotic, useless. Doctors are just watching people die from infections that should be easily treatable. Pneumonia, surgical infection.
You're helpless.
You're helpless. The WHO declares a global emergency, but by month 3, it's already too late. It's everywhere, and it's untreatable.
With the mortality rate settling around 30 to 40%, the social fabric starts to unravel fast. This stops being a health crisis and becomes a civilization crisis.
The death toll hits essential services first. Doctors, nurses, truck drivers, power plant operators. When a third of your population is either dead, dying, or running for their lives, those services just stop.
Supply chains break. Food stops reaching cities.
Cities become death traps. Governments try to enforce quarantines, but they fail. There's not enough manpower. And unlike anything we've seen recently, there is zero natural immunity. Our immune systems are completely blind. The infection curve isn't a curve, it's a vertical wall.
And the human response, according to the sources, actually makes the collapse worse. Panic overtakes reason.
The social order just fractures. The sources detail these horrifying scenarios where public trust is gone. Hospitals are attacked, they're burned by mobs who think doctors are spreading the disease. Scientists are targeted by conspiracy theorists.
And misinformation, amplified by our own technology, spreads faster than the virus itself.
Society just dissolves into fear and survivalism.
By the end of the first year, the initial wave is over. The world that's left is fundamentally changed.
Urban populations have dropped by 40% or more. Survivors are isolated in small, fragmented communities. Cities are just empty monuments to how fast it all fell apart.
But the disaster doesn't stop with us. It goes back to that 30% host community loss from the simulations. It becomes a full-blown ecological catastrophe.
Right. The models show key species in the ecosystem just vanish. They become extinct because they had no defenses. And then you get cascading failures. Key pollinators die off.
Causing crop failures.
Widespread, permanent crop failures. The food web itself is destabilized. The sources even speculate about the oceans. If a key plankton species collapses, the entire ocean food chain unravels. The life web itself is destroyed, leaving this profoundly broken, unstable new world.
When you step back and look at the whole picture, from the melting ice to the societal collapse, there's this devastating pattern. We basically created the engine of our own destruction.
That is the supreme irony that the sources point to. Human-caused global warming melts the ice, which releases the very pathogens that could extinguish human civilization. We built our own apocalyptic weapon by accident.
Suicide in slow motion.
And it's basically irreversible because of the feedback loop.
Explain that loop.
The permafrost isn't just a biological vault, it's holding back that 1.7 trillion tons of carbon. When the ice melts, that organic material rots, and it releases massive amounts of co-euros and, even worse, methane.
Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas.
Over 20 times more potent than co-euro in the short term. So the melt releases gas that causes more warming, which causes more permafrost to melt, which releases more pathogens and more gas.
It's a vicious circle, a direct feedback loop driving us toward collapse. Once it really gets going, our efforts to reduce emissions might not even matter in the short term. So the obvious, terrifying question is, can we stop it? Can we put the dead back in the ice?
The honest answer from all the research we looked at is profoundly bleak. Probably not. Once this large-scale thaw really gets going, there is no reverse button. We can't refreeze the Arctic.
But surely there are mitigation strategies, geoengineering.
People are looking at them, but the scale is just daunting. Things like spraying aerosols into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. They're unproven, they have massive unknown side effects, and they would require a level of global cooperation we've never, ever achieved.
And yet, despite all these warnings, the simulations, the anthrax outbreak, global action is basically paralyzed.
That's the ultimate tragedy here. The scientific community has been sounding this alarm for over a decade. But action is blocked by politics, by short-term economics, by corporate profits.
The ice melts while we argue.
And the viruses awaken while we deny.
So let's try to summarize the two futures the sources present. On one hand, some scientists argue the risk is manageable.
Right. That perspective is based on the hope that ancient viruses won't be good at adapting to human hosts. But the opposing view, which is backed by the hard data, the 2016 anthrax outbreak, the 48,500-year-old virus, the integrons, the simulations, that view says this risk is unique. It's existential.
So if we synthesize all of that, what's the most likely outcome if we stay on our current path?
The sources point to something that isn't instant extinction. It's suffering and collapse on a scale that's hard to imagine. Recurring pandemics of novel, ancient pathogens combined with a rapidly degrading global ecosystem. Civilization doesn't just end, it fractures. It collapses into smaller communities fighting wave after wave of untreatable disease and massive loss of life.
We'd be entering an era of biological instability we haven't seen since before the last ice age.
That's what the models suggest. Climate change isn't just about heat and sea levels. It's about freeing biological weapons that evolved to kill long before we evolved to build medicine.
This has been a chilling look under the ice, to say the least. Let's recap the 3 key takeaways you need to remember from this deep dive. First, microbial resurrection is a proven scientific fact. Viruses can remain fully infectious after almost 50,000 years. Time is not a defense.
Second, the ancient arsenal comes pre-equipped with super resistance. Mobile genetic elements called integrons threaten to make our entire pharmacy of antibiotics obsolete overnight.
And third, the mathematical models confirm the risk of ecological collapse is real. The release of just one invasive pathogen could cause a 30% loss in host communities globally, destabilizing the entire planet.
We built our entire civilization during the last 10,000 years of unique climatic stability. The Holocene. We are now actively destabilizing that climate, and in doing so, we're freeing biological enemies from eras before civilization even existed, enemies that evolved with a prehistoric, perfect efficiency for killing.
The ice kept the dead buried, it protected us, gave us time, and now we are digging them up. And our sources suggest they aren't just waking up, they're already hungry. So the final thought for you to carry away is this. When that prehistoric pandemic finally arrives, how will our fragile, highly connected modern world possibly stand a chance against an enemy that evolved millions of years before us, armed with weapons we can't even comprehend?